Sarah's Julius, but you can just call me Claire. I just want to thank Scoops, especially Kirsten, Deborah, and James, for organizing this lovely event this evening, and also to Kim Hunter, that's from Tango to with Text. Yeah, that's she's live streaming the event tonight. And I had a quick chat with Deborah earlier, and I just want to say and applaud you for everything that you are doing for our local authors. Scoops, I think, have the largest catalogue of local authors, local independent authors in South Africa. They now have more than 300 books on their catalogue or in their bookstore, which is amazing. I have the honor to introduce our two guests this evening. TK Pue. TK is a full-time lecturer at the Northwest University's Public Administration and Governance program at the Vaal campus. In addition, his current experience as a lecturer, he also taught and ran the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Public Policy program. Before joining academia on a full-time basis, he worked as a policy research consultant at the Gauteng Provincial Legislature and researcher for Integrated Development Planning Unit at the Sedibeng District Municipality, South African local government. He has just completed and led a research project exploring how government institutions across 4 South African states have been able to address the problem of illicit financial flows in the mining sector or industry, and how this impacts the socio-economic environment on those states. More recently, he received a doctorate in public management and governance. The study explored the possibility of building a local economic development model that utilized small to medium enterprises in developing township urban areas of Gauteng. And then Thabang, he is an experienced and acknowledged organizational strategist. His forte and focus is the evaluation and validation of the growth prospects of organizations within the dynamic and competitive operating context. He brings the power of systems approach in understanding contextual implications and determining opportunities and constraints for successful long-term organizational planning and successful strategy execution. He has assisted various organizations in the development of competitive strategies and identification of strategic performance drivers for their business models. Thabang has also published scholarly articles in the past 10 years on development policy and strategy, and how state policy must be structured to address the fundamental socio-economic challenges in the South African context. He's the new author of the book Fit for Purpose, as you all know, and whose theme emphasizes the need for leaders to have contextual intelligence in order to effectively manage organizational dynamics in complex and dynamic operating contexts. And I'm now passing it over to both of you. Thank you.
Good evening to all. I believe the job of a facilitator is not to be heard, but to just basically pass the mic on. So the aim is to make sure that you don't hear much of what I have to say, and we're actually here to I think celebrate and also think about, because I think we spoke earlier on and he said the key idea is to actually think about the current state of where we are and where we possibly like to get to. With that in mind, I think it's always I think apropos to congratulate someone for writing a book.
Yes.
Yeah. And then comes a question which I think no author likes to really speak about is, how did you actually come about with this book and this concept? Because I think there's a lot of leadership and management books that we have around, but I was searching around for ones actually mentioning this terminology. So if you could just maybe give us insight into your mind as to how you came about with this book.
Thank you very much, TK. Actually, the book is a result of my many years in organizational consulting work of more than, shall we say, 22 years. And one of the things that I observed during this time was that leaders tend not to grasp exactly how to manage their organizations in changing contexts, especially in complex contexts. And one of the things that I've always met and understood is that, you know, they'll tell you about the problems, you will fix them, they'll call you back 2 years later, and you still have to come and deal with exactly the same problems. And it became very clear to me that we don't understand that an organization is quite a living organism that has to be managed in a specific way. So the book is a culmination of observation and I think frustration with how leaders manage organizations. So I thought rather than write as much as I've been doing, articles which you'll pick up in the newspapers, print or electronic, why not produce something that you can always have access to? Because people tend to forget, where did I read this, where did I read the other? You know, and they don't like to go and search and look around for those articles, you know, via electronic media or Google them. But here you have the whole access. I mean, all the documents are there, all the publications are there, and you have it right in your shelf. And you can always visit it if you find something that, you know, really bothers you and you want to check whether has it been talked about in this. So that is the motivation behind the book. It was really to try to synthesize my experience and share it for posterity.
On the title, Fit for Purpose, I was doing some, I think, research before that. It's actually a very uniquely British concept. When I was reading Ashby and the boys from Queen Mary University, and if you ever listen to British politics, exclude the Brexit issue, which I don't think they were practicing your theory, yeah? But it's actually not found very well in South Africa. I think I was trying to actually find even within the politicians or who actually uses this term. So if you can just maybe unpack it for us who are mostly South African, because I said in Britain, if you go there, it's quite a normal, it's part of the lexicon. Everything has to be fit for purpose. So how did you arrive at it for our context?
Well, I think it will take a little bit long to unpack the thing, but let me have a look at it from this perspective. Organizations live in contexts, and the context that organizations have been living in ever since the recording of history has been changing. Centuries or beyond the 13th, the 12th, and the 9th. Since the printing of anything that is all manuscripts. But the state of the complexity at that time was still complex to the people who were existing there. But over time, what we've seen is that complexity has accelerated and it has intensified in its nature. So the last 10 to 20 years, for instance, has seen a rapid advancement in the complex nature of the context in which we exist. Now the question really then becomes, if there is so much acceleration in the change of the context in which we exist, how sure are you that you are properly prepared to survive in that context? There's so many organizations and companies in South Africa that have disappeared, and people have always wondered, why have they disappeared? Companies like the Premier Milling Company, you know, an old company in South Africa. What happened to it? How did it disappear? Kodak. How did Kodak disappear and why? All those instances are instances of a company that could not understand and comprehend the changes in its operating context and then adapt. By adapting, I mean make itself fit for purpose. The purpose being the purpose of the original company. When you form a company, if for instance it was formed in the 1950s, its purpose was to deliver a certain particular type of value. You will have to think about how differently shall I deliver that value as time goes on. Is it the same way that you're going to use in the 1990s, in the 21st century? Definitely not. So the way you structure a company depends on the context in which you are at a particular moment in time. Which means that now you really have to ask yourself the question, are we really structured properly in a suitable manner that fits the context in which you operate to deliver the value that we promised we're going to do? So that is the long explanation of fit for purpose. The purpose being, by purpose I mean the original intent in establishing an organization. It is supposed to produce this particular product or that other product. But how will it deliver that product to the customers over time into the future as the context gets more and more complicated? When do you really sit down and say, hey, is our company really okay at this point in time? And is it going to be okay next year? Was it okay 5-10 years ago? Most of these companies, and they were headed by brilliant people, excellent people, disappeared because they couldn't understand the changes. Today I was reading a very, very interesting article. Standard Bank, for instance, is closing about 95 or 91 branches, which means a lot of losses of work. Why are they doing that? Because they're asking a simple question. In the changing context, is our model of delivering value suitable for that context? And they've come to the conclusion it has to change. Because most banks now don't want us to go into the bank. You know, you are able to access the bank and do whatever you want to do on your phone. Even for old people, they're able to do that. So the question then really is, do you have to have many branches? That is the structure that delivers something that you said has to be and will be appreciated by the customers that you wish to target. So that is the origin of the word fit for purpose. At a particular moment in time. It may be fit today, it may not be fit 5 years from now.
I think you're taking us around. So in about, I think, 3 or 4 months' time, the government is going to, whichever government it is, we're not going to maybe take a particular stance, is going to be releasing what they term the 25-year review of South Africa's democracy. In this, there's always going to be highlights. I can tell you what the first page is always going to look like. They're going to quote former President Nelson Mandela, as all reports in South Africa tend to do. You've just spoken about the socioeconomic condition, I think, which is about to be amplified and get worse due to technology. How would you assess the Republic as things currently stand? Is South Africa fit for purpose for another 25 years? Or what can you pick up for us? If South Africa or South Africa Inc., where are we standing in your methodology of fit for purpose? And please feel free to mention Kusasa if you like.
Great question.
It's a very interesting question, but I've been asked that question several times in the past, for instance, 4 weeks or a month or two. And I would like to approach the question from a historical perspective. In 1994, when we took over as a new democratic state, what did we contend with? What were we facing? What were we inheriting at the time? And I think all historians and those that actually record economic history also will tell you what the democratic government inherited from the appointed government was profound in many ways. It has never been seen anywhere else in the world. And this is why the rest of the world was wondering, can they do it? Can they pull it off? Because the challenges were so huge. Now, when we are faced with that sort of situation, the first question that we ask is, what sort of structure do we need to put in place to be able to deliver on the expectations of the people, to be able to manage what has to be managed? And the answer is a very simple one. You need a capable state. And if you recall, in 2006 and thereabouts, the words capable state were being bandied about by politicians in various different types of platforms. And if you ask one of them, what do you mean by capable state? They wouldn't explain that. Now, a capable state is something that was needed, that had to be built in order for it to deliver on the huge gaps that we inherited, you know. To give you an example, one of the first things that was done was to publish what we call the Reconstruction and Development Program. And part of his biggest task was to try to make an impact on the poverty levels that were existing there. And we did that. We put in place the welfare system, etc. But in doing so, questions had to be asked. For instance, how do you sustain the welfare system? Where do you get the money from? And if you recall, the very first institution that underwent very serious transformation was Treasury and SARS. For a particular reason. SARS was necessary to make sure that we can collect as much as possible from the potential and existing taxpayers. And indeed, if you plot the income, you know, the revenue stream, the tax revenue streams that came afterwards, they were rising, you know, on an exponential basis. So that was excellent. And then we had to strengthen Treasury to make sure that they manage our finances very well, the public finances very well. And we did that. But we decided to stop there. We didn't go to others. There's, for instance, the need to look at, there was and has been a need to look at education, for instance. Was it properly structured? The health system, was it properly structured? All those things fall under what we call a capable state. And the first and the second president up to 2007 tried very hard to achieve a bit of that. But something happened after that, after 2007, that actually went against that principle of achieving a capable state. Because we had somebody now who came in to work against the creation of a capable state, but brought in this, you know, a policy, a paradigm, and an attitude of literally destroying whatever was managed to build until then. And this is why we're who we are now.
Okay. I think you're treating this someone, I'm not sure how many of you guys have read Harry Potter. There's a character, and I think in the first two books they say, "He who shall not be named." So we shall leave him as "he who shall not be named." And I think it really now touches on parts of your chapter 3, 2 and 3, and I'll just dissect it by asking. You touch a lot, and you even look at the as you, and I think you already touched on it, the issue of leadership and leaders. And it's always, when you read the book, actually one of the things I like is that you give sufficient information about the context of where President Nelson Mandela came in, but you also leave a nice gap to say, look, what comes next? And I think that's a question most people are now asking, to say, does a system trump an individual, or does an individual create the system? Because it would seem as though South Africans have there's a desire for a messiah. Mandela, maybe his greatest sin was that he put maybe expectations too high. And now people, when they think of, I think it's Aubrey Machite used to say, I think the nickname for president, "He who shall not be named," used to be called, it was called the Son of Man. I don't know why Aubrey got that from, but but he used to say that. So it really raises the question of, does South Africa need leaders or a fit-for-purpose system? Because I think it does kind of play each other out. Do we need a system or a person?
It's a fantastic, question that you're raising. But if you think about it, we recognized that we needed to have a framework within which to work prior to 1994, and we negotiated that framework, and then we adopted it as a constitution in 1996. So the constitution is a framework. It's a framework in the sense that it gives you a vision of what type of society you want to have, and it gives you an indication of the values that you would like to have and achieve over time. It talks about the basic human rights, and then it talks about the economic rights that should be achieved on a stepwise, cumulative basis, incrementally over time, providing the government has the means to do that. Now, that is the framework that I think you're talking about. But one of the things that we assumed, I think, was that in creating that framework, which actually tells us how we should behave, the first person who was going to be the leader under that framework was going to be the person that actually will give it effect and let it grow. Indeed, we were lucky in the sense that Mandela was that type of person who espoused and exhibited the values that we loved and worked within the system. Thabang came in and also lived within the system. I wouldn't say 100%, but he lived within the system. But we didn't think that there would be someone who would actually literally ignore the framework and undermine the framework. And that is where we are now. And so the last 10 years have been a shock for us. The question is it a bad shock for the country? In my view, I don't think it is a bad shock for the country. I think it's a very good shock in the sense that we realize that the framework requires certain values, and those values need to be followed, implemented, enforced by systems. We have criminal justice system, etc., etc. All those were supposed to be pillars. The Chapter 9 institutions were supposed to be pillars that actually support that framework and make sure that we live within it. Now, you touched on the issue of Moshoeshoe the First. Now, he had the same problem as Mandela, as I mentioned in the book, in the sense that Mandela was trying to build a non-racial society, united around all those principles, non-racialism, etc., etc. So he was literally forming a new nation. Moshoeshoe was faced with the same situation under very trying conditions, 1845, 1870, during the time of the Difatrani, whatever they call them in English, the internecine tribal wars that actually, ripped South Africa into different parts that we see now. The paradigm then of the ruling chiefs was based on, I must gain as much land as possible. I must conquer as much of the territory as possible. Your strength was based on the extent of the size of your territory. But he came in and mobilized all the people that were dispersed from these other tribes and brought them together under a nation. And he realized that unless he leaves the values that he was taught by Mokrobe, who was his coach, he would not be able to form that nation. And those values were the values of justice. He brought in the question of justice. That is the first person who brought it in, 1875 actually. Justice was right at the heart of his making, of his being. Because Mokrobe told him that, if you want to form a nation, you must not kill your people. You must rule them with justice. And he embedded in him, the respect for conscience. And he said to him, for instance, that you must always consider conscience to be your sister. When you do the right thing, she will sing for you. She will support you. But when you err and do the wrong things, she will torture you until you go back to your grave. Now, that is a very powerful statement, philosophical statement, well, in the late 1800s, all right? Those are the principles and foundations of ethical leadership that we actually need now. So, to take it back, to go back to your question that you asked, leadership and structure, we need both. You need to have a framework. You need to have principles and values that we require for leaders who occupy those positions that we have delineated under that framework. And unfortunately, in the past 10 years, we've seen the undermining, the erosion of that framework and how it is managed. So that is at the center of our problem now.
That's actually a very good one. It actually brings us to, I think, a question your book does touch on a bit, and I think maybe this is more to your liking. The issue of there are leaders, and then there's what's called an elite, basically a conscious of sorts of the leader. And the work, when you were speaking about South African Airways in the book, and you said, listen, is it real developmental? And I think this can be ascribed to most of the state-owned entities. And my question would go, how would you judge our elites and how they've handled our state-owned entities? I asked this in the background. There's a British author called Aaron Davis who just wrote the book Reckless Opportunists, Elites at the End of the Establishment, where he actually makes an insight into the British elites to say, look, the system in Britain has worked quite well for them, but you tend to find that the elites have now started to almost get obese of the system, where you find private sector people, before they become private sector people, that start at Whitehall, which is our treasury, and the private sector will hunt them with an implicit understanding that once you've gone into Whitehall or treasury, you come into the private sector, you make sure that our rules and regulations are to our advantage. Now that's their form of whatever moral corruption I think Davis is hinting at. But our elites tend to be found more in these state-owned entities. If you had to judge them against the framework of fit for purpose, which I think most of your book does do, how would you judge our elites, and also how they handle our state-owned entities?
I think what I always like to talk about when talking about leaders in South Africa is that, I believe political parties, and especially the African National Congress, because they've been in power for such a long time, need to adopt what I call a political philosophy that espouses the highest level of consciousness for social justice as its mantra. Now, if you accept that, and you publish that, and you write about, and I've written about this, and challenged them to put it in their manifesto, they of course didn't do so. They turned it down for a simple reason. Because when you've actually adopted that as a political philosophy, everything else that you do can be benchmarked against it. Your conduct as leaders in the SOEs, as political leaders, we always say, but you said you have a very high level of consciousness for social justice. Then how do you justify your current behavior, etc., etc.? And the SOEs are nothing else but pillars of state to deliver the services that the state committed itself to do in its manifesto, etc., etc. They are part of that concept we talked about at the beginning, the concept of a capable state. Unless they are efficiently managed, effectively managed, they cannot deliver on that. Now, that's why you need leaders to understand, and they must be schooled into that concept of the highest level of consciousness for social justice. If you look, for instance, at ESCO and the investigations by the Parliamentary Committee in 2017, 2018, and you recall the behavior, the conduct of those guys, their attitude when they're being asked questions in Parliament, etc. Everything tells you those guys didn't care a thing. For them, the company was for them to use as they pleased. For them to write off 20 or 12 billion was nothing. And this is what we're facing right now. But if that principle, that mantra of of conscience for social justice had been put up front, embedded and enforced, you will get a different response. Because it is the structures that you have, the values that you have, that actually shape how you behave in any position of leadership. Whether it is private sector, whether it is stable enterprises, whether it is the public sector. That is what drives. And the thing that I'm trying to emphasize in the book is that we have not paid attention to that. This is why our state-owned enterprises are falling apart. If you take SA, it is exactly the same thing. How do you justify the appointment of someone as chairman or chairperson of SAA, a highly technical environment that requires professionals to do it, or for that matter, ESCO? And these people have never been in a business, have never run a business, they can't even define what a process is. You will recall during those parliamentary questions, there was one guy who was the chairman of ESCO, and he was asked towards the tail end of the questions around his performance. He said, if you rate yourself out of 10, what mark would you give yourself? He said 3. Now, how do you make such a statement on a public television? The chairman of ESCO, one of the biggest companies, in fact the biggest company in Africa, and that was one of the biggest in the world, and you say 3 out of 10, and you have never run something that is as complex, which takes us back to the complexity. Now, the question is, were we serious? Did you appreciate the challenge that we need to have a capable state in all its forms, and therefore have the best people to run those entities that form a capable state? That is the question that we all have to ask and answer.
That's good that you actually touched on ESCOM and SAA, where there's about 120 to 178 state-owned entities. I actually lose track sometimes. The issue of the training, and this maybe brings us to question your chapter 9, which you speak about fault lines of basic education. And here you speak about complexity. And I think most times when you say complexity to people, everybody nods their head as though we all understand what complexity is. But do you actually think we, looking at our education system, because these people must come from somewhere. Now, he who shall not be named is a different example when it comes to education. But there are basic thresholds of how you lead a state or entities. I think there are basic requirements you need. Is our education system sufficient at training people to actually understand complexity when sitting at boards, when you have a Steinhoff? Because I think the issue of corruption or moral corruption does extend beyond simply the public sector. And we have to then question, where does our education system lie in preparing people for complexity? Where do you think we lie with that?
I think one of the things that we need to do is to understand that in life, you learn from others that have been through the journey that you're trying to embark on. So you learn from other countries. How do they manage this and that type of situation? Malaysia is one good example of how they went through their challenges of inequalities, which we also have, structural inequalities, which we also have, and that were also racially defined over there, not by law, here by law. And many other countries, Indonesia is another one. China has gone through its own particular set of problems. One of the things that they realized was that, you need to ensure that people that run the entities are properly trained. Now, if you take France, for instance, the people that are in the top of the civil service, public service in France, come from a particular university, Ecuador University, you know about it. That there's no way you'll be right at the top unless you're a product of that. So you have to have an understanding that you must develop a certain type of people that you require, that you can deploy as the requirements so dictate. And therefore, education for us was one of the most important tasks that we had to deal with. And I'm trying to point that in the book. But let's go back a little. During the apartheid thing, education was used as an instrument to prevent black people from developing capacity and capability to compete equally with white people. So it was used as a barrier, and it was effectively done. The first thing you do when you get into democratic space is that you want to reverse that. Like we wanted to reverse or make an impact on poverty, so must be education. So education must be the first thing. We have to make sure that we have access. We have the best teachers, we have the best facilities, we have the best infrastructure, and everything that delivers on that. We recognize this. But in the book I'm trying to show that we went through iterations of policy changes, etc., etc. Yet in Zimbabwe, Mugabe recognized that and did a simple thing. Let's do the basic stuff. Bring the right qualified teacher into the class, make sure that you support them to the best that you can, and let them deliver. We have recognized, for instance, that early childhood centers are things that are required in South Africa to try to build a foundation. We did this way back in 1996. It has only taken, it's only now in the president's speech, the last time, where he actually mentioned this as a critical requirement. Now you're sitting there, you say, we've had 25 years.
Yep.
Why did we not recognize this? Why didn't we do it? It is such a simple thing to do. Because it's a supply type of thing. Education is a supply issue. You can say we focus on the provinces, you find all the best contractors in the province, build the best schools, you delineate what the schools are going to be, you establish the benchmarks that have to be followed. You make sure that for each ward there is an early childhood development center, or one that is shared between 3 wards or 2 wards, or whatever the case may be. These are easy to do. And when you go to the Western Cape, you find that in Cape Town, they are far advanced insofar as trying to establish or do that. And yet we're not learning that this is most important. We're only trying to do it now in 2019. We talked about it in 1996. A child at the age of 5 must be able to be clear in terms of reading and calculation. They should be clear about it. My grandchildren do that all the time, from that age. So why is it that, we allow this system to go on? Because as we allow it, it does what we're talking about, developing elites. Because what we did now, those that were beginning to earn better salaries in the public service were able to take their kids into better schools, and even leave the areas where they had originally been there for decades in order to access for themselves better education because the public sector was not providing it. Now, these are easy things to do, simple things to do, because as I say, they are supply type of things. And there is no excuse why we have failed. But if you look into what I'm saying in there was a strategy that was proposed that let's import teachers from India, from wherever, and they should come under very strict arrangements, 5 years, etc. But they should be clearly, carefully selected, and all that kind of thing. Who said no? SATU, the South African Teachers Union. So in my writings, and I'm saying, SATU is the biggest impediment to the development of the black child ever. But remember, SATU is the smarter member of COSATU in the tripartite alliance because they're educated. Now, why do we allow that? Why do we allow, for instance, a tripartite alliance to exist post-1994? That has resulted in such a situation where nothing works because everybody comes in from an ideological point of view. So we have failed to develop the right type of, human resources that we need to drive the current situation. And people are talking about even more complex now, eras that are coming. We haven't even managed the current era.
It's actually good that you touch on ideology, because I think your chapter 4, which I characterize as ideology versus pragmatism, it raises the question of saying, and I think I found some happiness when you spoke about Ryanair, to say part of complexities and systems is that you're able to change them. Now, if we're following your logic, you're saying the tripartite alliance is not fit for purpose. Yet the tripartite alliance, contradictorily, they brought us President Cyril Ramaphosa currently because he comes from that school of thinking. How do you think he's going to handle it now?
The question of the tripartite alliance is a very important one for South Africans to understand. Is that you have in that alliance a structure where one component of the alliance, which is the ANC, was elected by the voters. The other two components were never elected, but they're a coalition government. Now, we have been ruled or governed by a coalition government since 1994, and many people don't understand that. And yet, the other two components, the one is a Labour component, the other is a Communist Party component. The Labour component are actually, there for group interests, to look after the interests of their members. The Communist Party has always masqueraded itself as the think tank of the ANC prior to 1994 and for many decades before that. The question then arises, when we moved into the democratic phase and preparing to govern, did the ANC really think about the structure that must be in place? Did they think about the question, are we properly structured to govern in the new era, rather than lead as we used to lead in the era prior? Which was different. It was a different context altogether. The context after 1994 was very complex. You're dealing with demands from different types of people, motivated by different interests, in a variety of places. South Africa is a very diverse and complex country. And I don't think we're ready for that. I don't think they applied their minds. And remember, the other question is that unlike other countries that were colonized by the British, etc., and so on, where independence was a process that was either pressurized by guerrilla wars and so on, or negotiated, and where the remnants of the colonial empire or power were remaining to work with the remainder, with the new rulers or governors, in order to pass on the skills. In South Africa, we didn't have that. None of the people that came in 1994 had prior public service experience. And we gave them the biggest responsibility without that experience. That was the biggest risk we ever did. And the other issue is that, and they were not very prone to listen very well to advice, as they are still not very prone to listen to advice at the current moment. So if you ask the question, has the structure worked? You must answer the question then. I like to look at it from the reverse. Have the policy decisions, products of that structure being implemented well and effectively to get South Africa to where we want it to be? The answer is an absolute not. Because what we have had is that we've experienced an alliance or an ANC government, which had a lot of incoherence at the top in terms of policy. And this has been mentioned by so many entities, so many analysts, the World Bank, and everybody else. We still have it now. So you're asking, can Ramaphosa survive in that? I wrote a piece last year where I was actually warning him about that you need to deal with the tripartite alliance if you want to make sure that you change the ANC. We are beginning to see everything that I said beginning to manifest itself right now. Conflicts because of fractions, conflicts because of opposing and competing interests, both from the communists as well as society, which is now being more or less killed, and there are many others now that are in the pen. All of them are fighting for access to the trough. There's no other interest. What is that? Access to the trough. And so we're in a very complicated situation now because the current president does not have the latitude and the freedom to be able to do what he needed to do because of the restrictions and the handicap that he suffers from the tripartite alliance as it is structured right now. It's a central piece of the book about how the policy incoherence has manifested themselves in so many ways. People may also not be aware that the National Development Plan is touted as the official plan of the state. It is not, because it has not been accepted by the components of the tripartite alliance.
So we're planless at the moment, that's what you're saying. Which then brings us to the issue of, I call it political entrepreneurship. In your book, I think you touch on the private sector and you say, listen, it's about supply and demand. And one could say it's the same thing with South African politics. In the ANC failing to produce a conducive environment, we have seen new entities spring to the fore. Some call themselves the Blue Wave and tout a certain province. Some people call it a country as their success story. Some of them come into parliament with red overalls promising many goodies. Others are still stuck in KZN. Others are stuck in the Eastern Cape. And the question then goes, especially for, I think, a younger cohort, which, yes, they still live with the legacies and the oppression of what apartheid did in colonialism, but they're not so sold to the ANC as their only saviors. How then do you assess them? Do they understand complexity? Do they understand the concept of saying, listen, it's one thing to be outside shouting that, look, the ANC is doing this and this wrong. When the E, when the F, when the D, when the A comes in, we will be much better. Because sometimes it would seem as though democracy gives very simple solutions. How would you judge these outsiders who say, listen, if when we come in, we will be different?
Well, we've gone through, and we're still in a very depressing situation in the sense that we haven't experienced growth for the past 10 years. So people's lives have not been impacted positively in terms of improving their circumstances. And when you have a situation like that, where growth does not translate into improved life circumstances or lived circumstances, it becomes very problematic. You're going to end up with people being entrepreneurial in many other things. You get antisocial behavior. You begin to have, things like thefts, etc., escalating. And indeed, you can plot that and track that. It happened in the past 10 years. And that is the product of non-growth. You need to have growth so that people have work opportunities, because it is work opportunities that bring in incomes and incomes that make people's lives better. We're not going to experience many job surges for the next 4 years. That's absolutely set, unfortunately, because the context has been changing and is changing. The mining industry is now mechanized. Many mines are closing down. The banks that can see are beginning to shed jobs because they don't need as many people as they where, for instance, they needed about 4 or 5 years ago. So context is accelerating in terms of change and the intensity of that change. The question that you have to ask yourself, bring it to the human level. As a person, you as parents, is your child being prepared better for a future that is ahead? Will your child be fit to survive in the world of 5 years from now, given the education that they are following? There's no certainty about it. There's no more certainty about career pathing. It's an old thing, it doesn't exist anymore. You'll only be required to satisfy a certain demand at a particular point in time for a particular length of time. After that, the gates are out, and you may not necessarily supply that service at the headquarters, in the buildings of discovery. You can do it from your home. So parents have to start getting used to the idea that their children may start working from the kitchen, from their bedrooms, and they're earning money. And I've seen some earning money, US dollars, working from a coffee shop. But that goes back to the education. How are we preparing our children to be able to live in this new world that is coming, that is already here? And we're beginning to miss quite a number of things. So growth is very, very important. If you look at, when I wrote a piece about 5 years ago, that COSATU must stop this, fixation on decent jobs, because what you want is jobs. Now, if you go, for instance, to Friday and the other towns around Friday, KZN, there are many shops, factories there that were started, some by Chinese, others by other nationalities, that were in the clothing or apparel manufacturing. Yes, they're paying low salaries, etc. And what did we do? The trade unions, COSATU, was all over the place, shutting them down because they are paying less than what has been agreed at the bargaining table of the big boys. Now, my point has always been, don't shut them up. Let's come in as government, supplement those salaries so we can retain people there to work and learn and preserve some dignity. Because we're already paying, welfare grants anyway. So rather than pay the welfare grant for those people in Friday, take them into the jobs. And which means what you save from paying, you supplement them there. But there's an added plus that you're getting is respect, decency, and the ability to develop skills. These are the trade-offs that we didn't want to take because we are fixated on ideology. Which brings me to the question of pragmatism that you talked about. I always say strategy is not about dealing with the context that you foresee into the future. It is about dealing with the context that exists now. And whether you describe that context with isms like whatever, you talk about the other guys with the red overalls, etc., it doesn't change anything. Come with solutions that deal with the issues now. And now that we're moving into, for instance, the elections in the next 2 months, you're going to get a lot of people coming up because of the low growth period that we've been having. Many people are going to come up and start saying that we can provide solutions. But the bottom line is this again, you must remember. In South Africa, we pay politicians very well compared to any other country in Africa or even in Europe. We pay them very well. So all you need to do is to make sure that you make quite a few noises in your own area, in your own village, in your own township, and you get people working around you or for you, and you get a party registered, you pick up a certain number of votes on a proportional basis, voila, you're in parliament. So that's 5 years, solid salary with pensions after that. So that's an incentive. People are going to parliament not because they are motivated by a high level of consciousness for social justice, but a high level of motivation to look after themselves.
We have a bit, I think, 2 more questions. Let's make it 3. Will you be running for president of South Africa? But I think that's more of a side note than anything else. May 8th happens. The next week, the president puts his cabinet together. As he promised, or someone promised, he cuts down a few things. Let's say before even cutting down, he gives you a call. He says, Thabang, we need to talk. 5 things I can do that will, you touch on in your last chapter, you say that what 2030 will or most probably will look like. He says 5 things I can do to change what you point out might be the negatives if I don't do this right. 5 things. He calls you, it's not a Busasa contract, he's just saying, advise me in the correct way. What do I do?
For me, it's very simple. The first thing that I would advise them to do is that, look, let's put in place clear pathways to establishing a capable state. And it starts with establishing a technocratic level right at the top, which reports directly to him, like they used to do in Malaysia and Indonesia, even in many other places, Vietnam for that matter. And this technocratic council, what they call development council, literally manages infrastructure programs, investment programs, etc. And they decide where things are going to happen, but they are technically sound. Second, people in this country are complaining about clean water. Why can't we have in every province an entity set up to deliver clean water per province? It can be done quite easy. And the province may take a participation, whether you make it a private public partnership or whatever, it can be done. Third, people are tired of walking over untreated sewage in their living environments. Why should it be that in 2019, somebody opens their door in the townships, walks out, and then has to jump over untreated sewage that is flowing around? Just because the municipality has failed to put in place structures to ensure that the treatment plants are maintained properly and thoroughly all the time. That's easy. It's a supply thing again. All you do is to make sure that there are structures in place that are going to make sure that that happens. We can do that. And there's no reason why it can't be done. And number 3, which is what they're trying to do now, make sure that you break up ESCOM in such a manner that you're able to create entities that can be more transparent and that are more accountable. Do that. Because ESCOM is so central to what we do. It is very, very, very important. And, fix SARS. Just make sure that you fix SARS. But, I've now left something that is so important in the lives of the people. There is no reason why you can't just fix the SAPs. And I've consulted to the SAPs, by the way, in 2014. And trying to show them exactly what they should do. SAPs, make sure that the SAPs is responsible to the provincial executive leaders of the SAPs. Break it down. Don't leave the police under the National Commissioner, because we follow a principle of community policing. That's the principle that they do. If you're following a principle of community policing, then it means the police in the Free State, where we come from, should have their commissioner in the Free State who knows the region, who understands what is going on, and they should be managed from them. The National Commissioner must be nothing else but just allocation of funds. The same for all the other provinces. Those are the most critical things, and they can be done very speedily.
Will you be charging the president for this advice? I would just, let me to the second last question. I think it more has to do with the audience that is here. A lot of the times, what I liked about the book personally was the fact that, as I told you outside, it's very practical. It's something I can actually go to my students, tell them about it. But what I did tease out, and I think maybe it's a issue which it's one thing to look for the public sector, whether it's fit for purpose or whether politicians are fit for purpose, but what about society as a whole? Because someone has been voting for these people. And the question of, I think the Constitution says, the law says, ignorance is not an excuse. How then do we change society? Because there must surely be a reason why society, fully knowing with the news that's available that this person is bad, but we still put them in. Maybe, how then do you tackle that one? Because to me it would seem as though we are also somewhat culpable for what's been happening, but it's easier to blame those people that shall not be named.
Politics is about winning power. That's all it is. And you don't have to be honest to win power. We've seen that over the ages. Even crooks win power. Now, one of the things that you do is to make sure that you create institutions that will enforce certain types of behavior as well as certain types of values. We have missed that opportunity. When Mandela was still alive, people were always associating, telling their kids that, who is your best grandpa? All the kids would say, Matiba. Why? Because they recognize in him certain values. Now, in the last 10 years, when did you ever hear a president stand up on Radio South Africa, either on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, talk about the values that we need in the society that is breaking up, etc., and what you should do about it? We've never heard that. But the other cynical way of looking at it is that for the ANC, this has been pretty good. The less you ask questions, the more they're going to be in power. Because remember, the majority of the people that are voting have been voting for the ANC on the basis of this liberation thing in 1994 are the poor people. And when you've given them social grants, and they know and they say that the social grants come from the ANC, you're not going to change that mindset. So the only weapon that you have is that educate as fast as you can so that people can start thinking critically. But then it brings me to another cynical way of looking at it. Why have we failed to improve our education system? Is it not because it is working for the ANC? It's another cynical way of looking at it. I don't know. But if you remember what JZ used to say, he used to say that we have problems because of clever blacks. Now that tells you, it gives you a mindset. So this man does not like educated people. He understands very well that the more educated people you have, the more trouble you bring for yourself. And this is something that I think the ANC has forgotten to see, because the context has been changing. The moment we started using social media, that changed completely. Even our grannies now can read in Xhosa or Zulu from another, or the grandchildren, what is going on. So ANC forgot that. We have social media that now communicates, transmits information very fast. That's why we're having a change. And I did write in 14 rather, that the ANC was going to lose 3 metros, and they did. Okay? Some people used to say, said to Tim Modise that I'm a prophet. How did I know? We're going to have the same situation here. Gauteng definitely may go. And part of the reason why you go is because far more educated people are in Gauteng, and they exercise their minds and thoughts differently. But rural places will always go for the ruling party. So, but these things take time to change. But the warning that I'm giving is that be careful. For the other countries, that came through the colonial period into who they are now, went through the easy path, when information was not easily transmittable. For us, for South Africa, information is moving so fast that if you don't open your eyes, you'll be left behind.
And my last question, which might be somewhat a bit personal, I always find it fascinating when fathers speak to their children. Because I think it's very honest conversation and transcends age, time, and it's even quite spiritual in a way. When you speak to your kids or even your grandchildren, what are your two biggest fears concerning South Africa for them? And what are your two biggest hopes about this country?
Well, I mean, I'm an eternal optimist. To answer the question in reverse, very eternal optimist. I've seen so much in the world. I've been to so many places in the world, and I've seen how countries develop and get out of serious situations. Uganda was in trouble under Idi Amin, and I saw that. When Ethiopia changed and they developed and built the Red Square, after Haile Selassie was deposed. I was there when Haile Selassie was deposed, so I saw that. And you look at those things, if you were there at the time, and you saw the behavior of the people under Haile Selassie, you would think that they live in their own bubble. Because people could disappear. What is happening now? Young girls being taken and then becoming concubines. What's happening then? It's not new. It used to happen. We've seen it. So I'm an optimist. All these things change. Ethiopia right now is a marvel because things have changed, but they take time and you go through pain. We have gone through pain. So my hope is that South Africa will change. It will become a better place. And I hope that my kids will realize that they have to be well equipped to succeed in the coming world. And that's why in our family, what we talk about is education. Are you ready? What are you going to do? You talk to me about that. That's very important. My fear is about the social environment. Because we're not growing, because we're not having many facilities and things that deal with our social pressures, we're developing violent communities. You can't be safe anywhere now. Whether you're walking down the street in Cape Town or the street in Johannesburg, I get morbid fears. When my daughter is here, she's right here from Cape Town, I always pray when she's driving, maybe coming late, oh God, the moment she comes in, now I can sleep. These are my worries. And there are others who are living in different places which are not as terrible as Johannesburg. But crime is a serious, serious fear. And the other fear is that, make sure that your kids, when they get sick, they are close to a capable health provision institute. Because there are not many that are available. That is the second fear. You want to make sure that you can be looked after.
Can you maybe give us something a bit more positive?
But I've been, and I've said that.
That's why we always go the other way.
South Africa will change. We are going to change, and I think the elections will come and go. There will be a new phase. There will be coalitions, because I've said coalitions will happen, for instance, from 2024.